All right, we are live. If you don't know me, I'm Teacher Kelly Tagg, and with me I have Diane Manser, author of the book I Didn't Sign Up for This. So tell us a little about yourself.
Absolutely. So my name is Diane Manser. I teach high school English. I've been primarily in the ninth grade for about 10 years. I'm entering my 19th year of teaching this coming school year. And I've just authored and published a book. You can find it on Amazon. You can also find it on my website, teachingisemotional.com. And it's about those, in some ways, largely unspoken pain points, disappointments, emotional challenges that we experience in our classrooms that we tend to share with the people who are closest to us in our teacher world, but we don't really talk about them in a holistic way. And my goal, my mission is to expand education conversation to also include the emotional challenges of teaching and not just center so much on the content within our profession, but to nurture teachers' emotional strength.
Okay, well, so you are still teaching. So were you afraid of sharing these things and it being public now, or, maybe some of your students hearing about and reading it?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I really was. And this is a first time experience for me. So I didn't have any other publishing or writing experiences that I could default on. But yeah, there were a lot of times during the writing process where I would be both so encouraged and I would be so motivated to get the story out and to help other teachers and to open this conversation and to bring health and wellness and emotional strength to all of us. And then I would get to the point where I would hit this like, do I really want these stories out there? It's so personal. It's so vulnerable. Not a lot of people know about my journey or what I've gone through or how I felt about it. And is this going to land the way that I want it to land? And then I would kind of get this like regretful feeling like, why did I ever even start this? What was I thinking? And then again, I would get kind of back to this encouraged place of, I think this is the whole point. I think this is the whole point to be able to share and to show that, yeah, teaching is rewarding and teaching can make us feel like we're giving so much of ourselves, our best selves to others. And teaching can be very painful too.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that did help me through that was having readers. So I had friends read drafts of my book. I had teacher friends read drafts of my book. I also had some strangers I had met in writer groups that were willing to read some sections of my book. I had my administrators read sections of my book. Some read the whole book. So that was able to kind of get me a little farther along the path of confidence and assuredness that this is not a complaint book. This is not a education or teaching is bad, or this is a book that says I really love teaching. I knew I was going to love teaching, but there have been some complications that have come to me along the way that have really questioned if I wanted to stay in it and if I was going to be able to stay in it the way I wanted to. And this is a book that says this is how you can move through those, not get out of teaching, but this is how you can move through it. So I think going back to those reasons why I was doing it helped me when I felt very regretful and nervous, because as you've read it, Kelly, thank you so much. It is a very personal story.
Right. Right. Well, that's good to know. You even had your own admin read it so that so they could have eyes on it. Like, don't put this in there. This might get you fired. Or they would have that perspective. Yes.
Yeah.
Um.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Uh-huh. So let's start with, why did you become a teacher in the first place?
Mhm. I don't know your story with teaching, but for me, I always played teacher. And
Mm.
I've said that a couple times, and I have a lot of teachers I've met through this project, and they're like, "Oh, me too." And then we like all of a sudden we're back in our like 5, 6, 7-year-old selves, like sharing how we play teacher. But for me, I played teacher as a kid. I think that does say something. Like if you're going to spend your Saturdays, you're going to spend your after school afternoons and you're going to choose play. It's like, what are you choosing? That says something about who you are and your interests. Because as a kid, you could really choose anything. So I chose to play teacher a lot. So I think there was something in me from a young age that kind of like pulled me, pushed me into this field. And then as a student, I always loved school. I love being in school. I love being around my teachers. I love being around my friends. I love playing sports. I love being an integral part of my school community. I love not being anonymous. I love being a contributor in my school community. And so when it came time to choose what I was going to do, when I started looking at colleges, being a teacher just felt really natural, and I thought that I would like it. And I do like it, and I do love it. And what I wasn't expecting so early on were some of the challenges. I think I just saw it as, oh, this is going to be me teaching, and everyone I'm teaching is going to resemble what I experienced as a child playing, or in my undergraduate program when you're teaching to your cohort of peers, or in my student teaching when I was working with the teacher who had 20 years of experience and had already trained the class before I even got there. So when I walked in and experienced some surprise stress, I was like, oh, I was a bit jolted, and then, but I liked it so much, I didn't want to give up on it. And I think that's where my resiliency came in, and my wanting to better myself, better the situations around me, to try to get it the most right I possibly could.
That's great. And actually, before we move on, I want to share some of your social media. So you have a Facebook group for
Mhm.
teachers, right?
I
Teaching
do.
is
Yes.
emotional. Uh-huh.
hmm
And here, I'm not in the group yet, but I'll show the name of it. But yes. And then let's see, you have Instagram,
hmm
which teaching is emotional. And you have all kind, looks like a lot of reels on here. I'll have to go watch these.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, there you are with the book. Okay, that's great. Oh, and let's see, you have a TikTok.
Yes.
That's the one I have not gotten on is TikToks.
Yeah, that one's a lot of fun. I have to say, I have it in the intro of my books. I thought it was so funny. I am new to social media. I'm only about a year in. This book started as a journal. So it was my way of expressing how I was feeling about some of the, experiences I was having in teaching. And journaling it allowed me to place the feelings, not dismiss the feelings, and then work through the feelings and then figure out solutions. And so this book first started as a journal, and then it was growing as chapters and themes and helping others, and how can I get this into the hands of others. So one way you do that, one way you get your work into the hands of others, is to be on social media. So I joined about a year ago these different platforms, and TikTok was the funniest because I walked in, no algorithm, never had been on it. I'm still learning how to like post in Instagram and Facebook, which is kind of funny because it's 2023. And I'm like, how do you post in these things? Oh my God, I learned so much. And you walk into TikTok and you're like, what is this? And there's just videos booming and all this wild stuff you're seeing. And you're like, this is amazing. So I kind of put that one aside for a bit because I was like, that's the big leagues. I'm going to, these other ones seem a little gentler to use. But now I'm on TikTok and I love it. And it's so fun to see. Sometimes I'll put a video on there and it reaches like viewers and it has a comma, in the viewership. And I'm like, whoa, there were like 1,000+ people who viewed this, and who are they and where are they? And that's really fun. So I'm having a good time with the social media. I really am, especially with it being new for me. It's been a learning curve, but it's been a lot of fun.
Yes, I think that's why the teacher sites are so popular. We can all
Mhm.
relate to each other and really only other teachers know. Here, you also have a website. So I'm going to show
Mhm.
that.
Thank
Teaching
you.
is emotional, sure.
Mhm.
.com.
Yeah.
And I'll show this a little bit. So,
Yeah. Thank you,
and
Kelly.
no problem. And you can find your book, order your book here as well, right?
Yep. And then
And
if you, at the bottom where you just showed, if any of viewers, listeners are interested in checking out the book, if they have also said at some point in their teaching career, like, I didn't sign up for this, or I am really not sure if I can continue in this teaching profession, what do I do? And you're the teacher who's like, I kind of want to figure this out. I don't think I want to leave it, but I'm not too sure. This book might be right for you, but if you go onto the bottom of the website, you can get a free sample of the book to see if it's messaging, the writing style, if what I'm sharing is a good fit for who you are as a teacher and a person right now in your life. So you can always download a sample before you invest into the actual book. I also have a tab in the website too that offers some book study. So if you wanted to do a book study with friends or read it with a colleague, there's some chapter by chapter breakdowns of questions and resources that I keep updating as I find time to do so.
Oh, that's great. Yes. And then people can read it together. And I like how you let people sample it before they like try before you buy. So then, you can't lose if you do that. Okay, that is great.
Yeah.
All right. So in the book, you start off talking about the teacher shortage. So let's talk a
Mhm.
little bit about that.
Oh, sure. So I have research in the book too. While it did start as journal and it's personal, the story is personal. There's newspaper articles in there. There's research in there, and I learned something that didn't surprise me. And then I learned something that I was like, "Wow, that is very interesting," and it has to do with teacher shortage. So I learned that our most vulnerable subgroup of teachers is years 1 to 5. That didn't surprise me too much. That's our highest groups of teachers who are leaving the profession well earlier than what they ever intended. And I think in talking to teachers about, your year 8 and you're deciding to resign and you are definitely going to, what kind of has led you to that decision? In talking to teachers, it comes back to one simple comment every single time, is that teaching has hurt these teachers. So they weren't expecting some of the disappointments or the pain points or the struggles, and they kind of got hurt by teaching. That stress became much larger, and then they decided to put their talents somewhere else. The other thing that I learned, which was like, wow, that's really interesting. The second subgroup of teachers that's the most vulnerable to leave the profession are our years 23 to 26. And I thought that was really interesting. It's like this concept of I'm close to retirement. I have some invested benefits, but I don't know if I want to teach 10 more years or, 12 more years or whatever that number might be. So they end up leaving the profession much earlier than they expected to. So the most vulnerable subgroup is years 1 to 5. And the second most vulnerable subgroup that's contributing to a teacher shortage is years 23 to 26. I thought that was really interesting. And I read the reasons why. I was like, well, I guess that does kind of make sense. But it surprised me.
Yeah, that surprised me too, because you figured they would
Mhm.
be that into it or that close to retirement that they would muddle through. Doesn't surprise me about year 1 because I almost quit my first year. And I'm a career switcher, so it's not my first career, so maybe I'm a little bit different than like you or somebody else. But what I did instead was I tried a different age group and a different type. I tried middle school. That definitely wasn't for me. So I
Mhm.
actually praise you for being a high school teacher. That is not easy. But I am now doing special ed preschool and I'm happy. So I'm glad I tried something else before giving up. But you
Mm.
wanted to give up so many times, but you kept trying different things, which we'll get into. So you took a different approach, but you also still didn't give up. So yes. So let's talk about you
Mhm.
wanted to become a teacher all your life. You played games as a teacher. You went to school. Now you have your first teaching job, your first teaching day. How did that go? So what about the talk about the coffee boy?
So I was in. Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And we all have our experiences of this, and I'm so pleased with how the book has turned out because I had to do a lot of rearranging, I had to do a lot of revising, and that story wasn't shared originally until later. And then in the redrafting of my book, I pushed it much earlier. And I think that has such a large effect in the book because we all have our experiences of this where we come into our classrooms and we do believe ourselves to be more than ready. Like, you're that first year teacher, you are going into that second year, or you're going into that first day of the school year, and like, you're trying your best to have everything primed and ready. Your classroom's looking pretty good. You have an outfit chosen. You know what your lesson plans are. You know where you're going. You might even have a whole week of lesson plans, which sometimes in the early part of our career trying to get. What happened was I was more than ready to start. I felt very confident. I was very enthusiastic. And I had a 12th grade class at the time, and I'm fresh out of college, so I'm very young. And enthusiastically greeting all these new students into my classroom space, into their senior year. And this one student came into the space very angry, irritable, definitely did not want to be there, and definitely didn't want any kind of engagement. I would have been okay to probably just let him go in the room, and then I would have just figured it out, except that he was holding coffee. And this sounds so silly, but at the time, my school had a rule that you couldn't have any food or drinks outside of the cafeteria. And when I started at the school for the in-service days, they went over all the school rules, the bell schedule, attendance policies, latenesses, everything. And I was paying attention to all the rules. I didn't want to break them. So when I saw him with the coffee, at the time, I couldn't let him go in the room with that coffee because I was so fearful that, well, what if a principal comes in to just do a walkthrough or to see how I'm doing on my first day? And they see this student with coffee and they're like, hey, you know the rules, right? There's not supposed to be food or drink outside the cafeteria. Have you addressed this with the student? And now I'm called into question. That would make me so nervous. Additionally, I didn't want the student walking in with coffee and then perhaps other students would be like, oh, should I just have coffee in here? That's cool. I thought there was a school rule you couldn't have drinks. So I'm going to now I'm going to have 10 students with coffee tomorrow. All this is going through my mind and within, those fast seconds when we have to make a stressful decision. So my decision was to tell him that he had to get rid of it, and that did not go well. He was already so upset and so mad to even be there. I don't know why. That was his disposition, and it ended in an escalation where he refused, and then I try to double down and match that. All these lessons that we learn, right, Kelly, when we're in those early parts of our teaching career, and we make
Yeah.
some of these, oh man, these innocent errors where we're like, "Oh, if I had just handled it this way," or when I'm in an emotional state, which is what I've learned in my work as a teacher and in my introspective work through therapy and through reading books and listening to podcasts and working on myself. When we have an emotion and we match somebody else's emotion with that same emotion, all we're going to do is escalate. And
Mm.
really, we're not going to get to a solution. No one's going to win. And now we're in a complete recovery effort. We can do that as a parent, we can do that as a friend, we can do it as teachers, and it's kind of the same old show. So I did the only thing I knew to do, which was to double down and challenge him back because I thought, well, I can't have you tell me no and then just take that. I'll be a pushover.
Mhm.
But the challenge back did not go well. So I start my book early on with that story about what happened, why it happened, why I made the decision I did. And then I recognized that I was in a complete control trap. I also recognized that I was ill equipped to understand why his disposition and his choice to bring that coffee in would be so personally affecting to me as someone who wanted to uphold the rules and have this steady classroom. I also didn't understand other solutions. You
Mm.
know, I could have let him go in and been like, "Hey, good morning. I'm glad you're here." He probably wouldn't have said good morning. He would have walked into the room probably angry. The door would have slammed or something. And then later, I could have gone around to him in a quieter transition, softer kind of way. And I feel now and having those experiences since then that would have been a much better decision, but I just didn't know it at the time.
Right. It's hard to know. And I know what you mean because I definitely made mistakes like that when I taught middle school or as a parent. It's
Mhm.
hard because you want to enforce the rules, but how strict or should you be if you let them get away with it, they might keep doing it. It's a tough call. Um so let's talk about tech in the classroom. So I have to tell you, so when I taught middle school, we used Chromebooks as part of assignments, which did make grading easier with 160 kids.
Mm.
But I know what happened to you too. They were always had another tab open, playing another game or something. So in the state I live in now, our governor made an executive order that all schools had to get rid of cell phones, and they have a really strict policy now, which after teaching middle school, totally agree with it. Although on the parent side, I do think, like, can you make an exception at lunch just in case, I need to, or, something like that. But overall, I'm glad they did it, and I think it needed to be done. But yeah, let's talk about your issues with tech in the classroom.
Yeah, and my issues are very similar to what you've experienced, and a lot of teachers are too. And in working on this book, interviewing a lot of teachers, learning other people's stories, this one, Kelly, has been so painful to hear because it has caused, especially for our students in our secondary levels, our sixth graders up through our 12th graders, when they are going through so much change and they're feeling a bit insecure, they're feeling a little unsure of themselves, and then they're navigating that as well as like, what is the point of school? Why am I waking up to go here all day? I don't think I need this anymore. I don't know what my end goals are. You're battling already so much motivation and pressures as well. And then you add that phone in, and it's just like, or, the laptop that has all the games and apps and messages and whatever. It just adds in so much distraction. And then what I kept on hearing from teachers is, I feel like I'm talking to myself. No one's even listening to me. What's the point? No one's actually doing the work unless it's graded and it's like high stakes, like a test or something. I'm just in a constant battle. I could tell students to take AirPods out. Within 3 minutes, they're back in. Now I have to keep telling the student. I'm just constantly reminding. I'm more of a behavior manager than I am a teacher. And after a while, you just feel very eroded by that. And yeah, we can all deal with that perhaps for a class period or maybe a school day. But if you're talking about going into, November, and you're still dealing with it, March, and you're still dealing with it, you begin to feel very defeated, and you begin to feel very purposeless. And that's what I was noticing in myself, my experiences with those distracting electronics. And that's what I was hearing from other teachers too. So when teachers have, perhaps like you said, a governor's support, high government in the state enacting certain expectations or rules, or they even have in their own school building, this is what we stand for. And we're serving education, we're serving integrity, we're serving attention. And you as a citizen in this school, the teachers have something that can protect them from being the teacher who wants the kids off the electronics. So I think that is such a great solution. And we're seeing more and more of that in the news, that teachers, or, I'm so sorry, school districts or states are saying no more phones, or we have to have them locked up, or they have to be away from the student's person. We're seeing more and more of that, but it has been a trying 10 years to get us there.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it's been. It's around 2014 when all that started to kick up.
Right. And in the book, you also talk about how you were teaching before the days when they had cell phones. And then, it always happens when something's new, it takes us a while to figure out the best ways to deal with things. So you had, when cell phones first came out, and then you saw the progression of it just getting worse and worse. Like, what year would you say when you first started seeing cell phones in the classroom?
So 2012 is when I started in 2006. And
Okay.
2012 is when I started noticing more students had the phones, but it was still sort of like a novelty. And
Mhm.
it was more distraction because it was like, look at what I have and look what I can do. Or they would like message some of their friends. But overall, there was still this like, I shouldn't have this in school. I definitely shouldn't be on it. It might get taken from me. I know not just my school district, but a lot of my friends as well. You could take that phone as a teacher and give it to a principal, and that principal could keep it overnight. Though that wasn't just my school district, that was like many school districts because it was just a discipline action.
Right.
Then around 2014 and 15, you now have such a rise in apps, so social media apps and other types of engagement apps, shopping, for example, or just like online games like Candy Crush, all that kind of stuff. You just have so many more users in that. So it's no longer this like, oh, I can message my friends. It's I can message the world. And I want to see if I put something out there, how many likes can I get? Like that whole idea of likes and approvals was starting to become really big around 2015. By the time I got to 2017, it was nearly impossible to manage AirPods or just, wired headphones and cell phones in classrooms. That's also around the time a lot of our school districts started moving to one-to-one devices. So students no longer needed to have their own personal laptop. They could, or a computer cart, or even a computer room in the building, like the computer lab. They started issuing one-to-one devices to students, which offers us so much opportunity as teachers. And then, of course, those can be monitored from the school district. But then it always has that flip side where it can provide a problem too with distraction.
Right. So, right. Like so many thoughts. So, what they implemented, and this just started this year and school just started. So, this is all very new, is that if you get your phone taken away in school, you then have to have a parent come and get it after school. And I guess if your parent can't come, they do send it home. I don't know if it's a matter of, oh, you can't take away someone's property, but they send it home in a locked case. And I won't go into detail, but my son did tell me how one of his friends got around that. So they find ways. But then like you can't get it back or out of this locked case until you have to have a parent come, which again, after teaching middle school, I'm glad that they're cracking down because you would take away a phone as a teacher and you always got the pushback from the parents. Like, well, this is my phone. I paid for it. You can't take it away. Well, like, how about you support the teachers in trying to implement some discipline so that we can have a good environment for your kids to learn in, So, and I think, and it's funny, you were talking about how the school monitors, they're not young enough to know that. So I remember they had to get rid of, at the middle school I was at it, they had to get rid of Google sharing or sharing stuff on Google because of the things that the kids were sharing. And then that was the first time they kind of became aware of like, oh, the school knows what we, so they don't have any idea at that age as well.
Yeah, and you're also dealing with a lot of impulsive decisions too
Yes.
when you're in that 7th grade, 8th grade group, and the kids don't always think about, oh, if I make this decision right now, there's going to be all these chain reaction repercussions that are coming at me afterwards, and they aren't always thinking about that. Yeah, I just want to say, just going through this conversation again, I'm so thankful for it. Thank you so much, Kelly, for bringing it to light, because for those teachers who and I started in 2006. Certainly I was with teachers in my building who were already 10, 15 years in. But for anyone who started around that time, you have taught most of your career in the pains of electronic distraction. And if you have weathered that and you have still maintained your joy in teaching, or you still are like, I'm going to try to figure this out. Like, I want to make sure that I come here and do the right job that I'm supposed to. I really applaud you, your bravery, your efforts, because most of your teaching career has been quite difficult in this regard. And we're seeing now, 10 years into electronics coming on the scene and causing problems, that administrators and school leaders are starting to come up with solutions. But 10 years is a long time to be a teacher in environments like that, not knowing how students are going to react to you, not knowing the pushback you may get from parents, but still every day showing up, trying to do your job really well.
Right. And I think it will become like we're starting to work on this, and eventually it'll become, I can't believe we used to do that or we used to allow that. It's kind of like when new things come on the scene, it takes a while. Just like I never would even think about getting in my car without a seatbelt. But like when seatbelts first came on the scene, people were like, why do we need this? Or, now people know the dangers of texting and driving. But when texting first became a thing, like nobody even thought of that. So I do think eventually we're going to get there and people are going to be like, I can't even believe we let them have cell phones. You know what I mean? So I think it's going to change.
Yeah.
So let's talk about there were 3 times in your career that you cried in class. Let's talk about the first time, and we can talk about all of them. But the first time you cried in class, what happened?
Sure. Yeah, I cried in class twice, like
Oh,
directly in front of those kids. And then I got choked up in a meeting with an assistant principal who was also my supervisor that year. So that was during our mid-year check-in. And then we had beginning of the year check-in. You know, they also have a cycle of observations they have to give. And it was a beginning of the year, mid-year, and then it was an end of year. And it was the mid-year that whew, had to gather myself with some deep breaths. Yeah, that would have been like that third instance. So the first time that I cried in class, that was for sure the most affecting time. I was teaching an 11th grade class at the time, pretty early in my teaching career. I was like in year 4. The class was very challenging, and they just sort of were very disruptive, challenging to sort of like gather in terms of classroom management to actually be able to teach. And then you were coupling those behaviors with other kids in the class who were really good students and wanted to do well for themselves and for you as the teacher, and who were just completely embarrassed, by their peers' behavior. So you had, like a lot of us do, we can look at our classroom personalities and be like, this class feels like this, but it's not the entire class. And that's where teaching can get very complicated, because you're like, this is hard, but it's not only hard. Yeah, so I was just in a situation where I know I was overly tired. I was overworking myself, trying to make lessons great, perfect, trying to grade really well with a high standard, trying to keep up the pace with my colleagues, trying to build a reputation as a teacher. I was teaching multiple preps. I had multiple classes. I was going into grad school. Oh my God. I think I had bought a house. I don't know. There was a lot of things going on. Very tired. And I just was in that class, and it was building and building. And I just remember like slamming my hands on my desk. My hands were stinging and burning, and being like, you're the worst class ever. And why do you act like this? And just completely losing my cool, yelling. And that alone jolts you, because
mhm,
now you've completely lost your cool. And I'm not sure about you, but sometimes when I'm really mad about something, I cry. And
mhm,
I'm not crying out of sadness. I'm not like, oh, I'm so sad. I watched this sad movie and now I'm crying over, relationships or life or whatever. No, I get like mad and then I cry. And it's like a reaction that happens to me. It's just like the emotion pours out. So yeah, I just started crying in front of the classroom. I'm standing up there in front of these 17-year-olds just to put a joke in. They're like nearly men and women,
mhm.
months away from being able to vote probably. And there I am, this adult teacher, crying in front of the class, which only made me more ashamed, more upset with myself, more mad at myself that I lost my cool like that. And then a bunch of those kids who were so tough for me just started laughing at me, pointing and laughing at me, which made it even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, even worse. That was the first time that I really lost it. And I know when I've shared this story with people, so many teachers are like, oh my God, one, I'm so sorry that happened to you. You don't
Mhm,
deserve it. Or they're like, yeah, I actually, the same thing happened to me. Or they'll say, you know what happened to me just the other day? I
mhm,
completely lost it on a third grader. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't matter how old the
mhm.
person is. It's an emotional response we're having. And
Definitely.
we have emotional responses to our aging parents. We have emotional
Mhm,
responses to our neighbor who lives across the street. We have emotional responses to the 3-year-old that we teach. It
mhm.
doesn't matter the age. We're human. We have emotional responses. It can come from anywhere, a
Right.
stranger that we experience in the grocery store. We could have an emotional response. So yeah, and sharing that story, I had a lot of teachers who were like, like the same thing happened to me where I was so overwhelmed. And then my PowerPoint didn't work and I just started crying. And I'm like, yeah, it's like the tip over the edge. You just can't,
Right.
And that says a lot about the stress that's building in our lives if the PowerPoint doesn't work and that causes us to cry.
Right. And they even bragged about it. I think that you were like the third teacher they had made cry. So they actually were trying, which makes it even worse. You're like,
Yeah.
ah. Okay. And then you were talking about how you were having a particularly tough year. Like you had some really difficult classes, really difficult students. And even your admin was like, I don't know how you're still smiling. I don't know how you're still doing this. And then you got evaluated as teachers do, and you understand constructive criticism. But just at that time, you felt like the criticism it just made it worse because you're just trying your best given some really tough situations, and the if you want to call it the constructive criticism just hurt in a different way, right? So
Yeah, and this is, I think, a really important conversation to have for especially our newer teachers. Because when I was a student in school, it was like, you can do these different things and then you could get an A in the class. You can get all these sort of approvals, right? In teaching, the evaluations that we get are pretty rigid and doesn't really take into account some of those soft skills we bring into the classroom or to the personality of the building. It's kind of like, look, here's your scale, and this is sort of where you are, and this is where I'm going to evaluate you. Now, my end of year evaluation that year wasn't bad. It was just average. It was just like that basic proficient, like, yep, checkbox, you were here, you showed up, you did your job. And I was like, oh my God, because that year was so hard and it kind of stayed with me everywhere. Something else that I've learned about myself and that I've had to work on is like, how do you release school when school is time to be released? So you can go into the next part of your life and your day and not still holding it and carrying it with you. And yeah, I carried that school year with me like everywhere. And at the end, to just sort of, it kind of felt a little dismissive. It kind of felt a little bit unacknowledged. Like you really managed some tough situations and you did a good job with it. But you just are this average evaluation. I was like, oh my God. It didn't make me any more excited to come back. It just kind of made me feel a bit more like, what is the purpose here if this is where you end up in the end anyway? So what I decided to do then is do my own personal evaluations. That evaluation is going to be the way that it is. It doesn't mean that's the full reality of how you actually manage yourself in that classroom. Because sometimes our administrators are also just trying to get through their work, or sometimes they're like, I just didn't see this end of the year evaluation as that big of a deal. So I didn't recognize it was going to pain you in this way, or I didn't recognize you needed like some more encouragement and build me up. Like if we don't express that to them, sometimes they're already on to their summer tasks. They're like, let me just get through these end of the year evaluations, check, put it in the system. I have hires, I have interviews, I have things that I have to be managing for our next school year, and I'm kind of moving on. So I think it helps to bring about, there's a humanness on both sides. And we also are able to, just like we can build ourselves up, we can evaluate ourselves as teachers. And I think that's an important skill. I also think it's an important conversation. So our newest teachers don't come to the end of a trying school year and think that that's going to be acknowledged. It may not.
right. And I think the hard part about teaching is there are so many things out of your control. I mean,
Mhm.
yes, you can do what you can with classroom management, or you can try different techniques and ways to reach that kid who's misbehaving, but then ultimately they have free will and they choose how they behave. Because being someone who has worked in other fields, since I'm a career switcher, it's like most in other jobs, it's like these are the things you can improve on. There are things that you can actively go do to improve on. Whereas teaching is so subjective and so many things out of your control. It's so hard to be judged on those things.
It is, especially when you're giving so much of yourself into the space and you're like, oh, I really think I'm doing the best I can in that area. I don't know what much else of what you could do to make that better. Yeah, and I agree. It is very subjective, and sometimes those evaluations are just sort of like vague boxes that get
Mm-hmm.
checked. It's not quite itemized to give
Right.
you a specific feedback to improvement. So yeah, thank you for acknowledging that. I appreciate it, Kelly. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Let's talk about the snacky girls. This is a good. So, okay, so let's start off with what were they like? What was the beginning of the school year like? And what happened with that? Let's start.
Yeah, so we're at the beginning of the school year. I'm probably in like my year 10, maybe year 11. And oh, this group of girls came in and they were, I learned later a lot of this behavior was carrying from middle school. I teach ninth grade. I was teaching ninth grade at the time. And so there was already a lot of energy that was created from middle school. And they all were in the same classroom. They were all in my classroom. So when they walked in, it was like 6 of them, which is a large group to start with that. And that's the tricky thing about teaching. And we all know that as teachers, we could have a group of 25 and we could really signal that like, hey, out of 25 students, 6 of them or 5 of them are kind of hard. And the other ones have sort of a gradient, but that certainly isn't the entire class. But the personalities can be so affecting, so overwhelming that it can feel like a very tough class personality, even though it's really only like 5 kids, or sometimes it could be 1 kid, right? It could be 1 student who can make the space more difficult. So yeah, these girls came in and they just sort of like yelped and just went nuts. They were all in the same class and they're getting up and running over to each other. And they're like, oh my God, you're in here. And they're hugging and they're high five and they're like, ah. And they just had this like, and I didn't know their names yet, and I'm like, oh, okay, all right, well, settle down. Let's get into your seats. I'm not sitting over there. I'm sitting over here. It was like an immediate defiance. And I'll tell you, it catapulted me back to the very first day when I'm dealing with like the coffee rule, So that was really tough. And I had learned a lot since then. So I tried some other strategies that had worked for me. Up until that point, I tried some of the one-on-one conversations. I tried the group conversation, but they were just getting so much power from each other. And they were just sort of like an unstoppable force. Like this one-to-one conversation, like I care a lot less about you as my teacher. I care a lot more about this social group. And that's something that we have to acknowledge, especially in our middle school and secondary students. Our elementary students tend to care a lot about what the teacher thinks about them. They care about that authority, and the social group. They're like, well, I don't want to get in trouble. So I'm going to kind of delay this social group for the authority of the teacher. In secondary, that switches. I care way more about the social look and the social pressure than I do about how the single teacher is going to view me, especially because I have 5 other teachers in my day. What does that matter if you don't like me or this isn't going too well, So I had to really, I did a lot of learning about myself in that semester. Like, why were they bothering me so much? How come I wasn't able to assert myself in a more powerful way? Why did I allow some of their behaviors to continue? That's really what catapulted me into the personal learning that I've done that I write about in the book.
Right. And I could totally relate to that because I had 2 classes like that when I tried middle school. And it was like, I don't know if they do it where you are, but we have like every other day, different classes. So these 2 were on the same day. So I had like 2 classes in a row where it was like the kids were ganging up and feeding off each other. You eventually finally just get to a point where you call a counselor. Talk about that.
Right. So you go through those systems where you call home, and that did help a little bit, but in all, it's kind of sometimes it can be where the student might get a talking to at home or a consequence at home, and they come in, they're a little bit better for a period of time, and they can kind of fade out again. And as the classroom teacher, you're like, oh, so I call this parent again and say like, hey, it was good for a couple of weeks, but now we're right back in it. Like, how much are you pulling in from home? That can get a little bit confusing too, or you're not really too sure where to land on that. Yeah. So eventually I ended up, getting guidance counselor help, administrator help. That did serve a better purpose because now there was like awareness, and then the counselors reaching out to the middle school guidance counselors and recognizing like, oh, this situation wasn't a good situation, even at the middle school. And here they just kind of landed in the same class together. Whereas the middle school, they had separated some of those kids out, and that just didn't follow through at the high school. So that was very helpful, getting that support. And I'm really lucky where I work because our administrators work hard, our guidance counselors work hard to try to improve when problems are presented to them. And I'm really lucky to have that support. I know not every teacher has that support.
Definitely. Yes. I did not feel that way at that middle school that I went to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then finally you have a breakthrough with those snacky girls. I have to say, this part of the book, I'm sitting there cheering. I'm going, yay, yes, yes. It was almost like a movie where all of a sudden at the end, you have like this really good ending. So I was literally like clapping, like, yeah. So
Thank you.
tell us about that.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Yeah, that's moving into the last third of the book where it's all of that growth, all those lessons, all that learning. And the first thing I had to do was really look at myself and be like, you know what, Diane? Like, you're allowing this. You're the classroom teacher. You're the one who's gone through all this schooling. You have all this experience. You know what you're doing. And yet, for some reason, you're like allowing it. And then I had to get that next layer down and be like, why are you allowing it? So I was able to get much more clarity once I saw a mental health professional who was able to work through this with me. But in that early time before I had that, it was like, you're allowing it. You're too afraid of what their reaction is going to be if you kind of shut it down, because then they're not going to like you, right? They're not going to like this class. They're going to be mad. They're going to come in here brooding. They're going to come in here like not getting what they wanted. And sometimes our young students who are still emotionally growing, they're not emotionally mature yet, they can be told no, or they can be held to a boundary or a standard, and then they can brood and they can get kind of like babyish in a way, and they can then, remove themselves from the classroom space or from the community of the class, possibly hoping that maybe you as the authority will change your mind, and then you'll go back on what you said, or you'll give them another chance, or you'll let them do that thing anyway. And what I learned was that never gets you anywhere. If you can hold that standard from the beginning and say, you walked into one, a high school today. Two, you walked into my classroom today, and you do not act this way in my classroom. I don't stand for it. I wouldn't stand for it. And I'm shutting this down immediately. Like, using some of that strong language, having that sense of who we are and having that empowerment within ourselves makes us not only feel self-assured, but it also strengthens us. And then it strengthens everyone else too. Because every other peer in that class, a lot of those students don't like it either. They're like, these kids have been causing trouble all school year, or, I can't even learn in here. This is a distracting environment. And those students then hear a very self-assured teacher. So what ended up happening was, with some strength from the therapist I was seeing, some reading I was doing, I ended up taking those students aside after class one day. One student just walked off. She was like, I'm not listening to this. She just walked off. But the other one stayed. And I was like, I need to tell you something very important. Like, I've allowed you to act like this. And starting now, I am no longer allowing it. And I just felt so incredibly like just charged up and in control of myself. And I'm not doing that anymore. A lot of the reactions were like very apologetic. A lot of the reactions were like, well, you don't understand, or, we will stop. We don't want to be in trouble. But then it started like kind of shifting a bit, but I was like, tomorrow when you come back here, you're going to be the best student selves that you can possibly be. And you're no longer ruining my class. And I just felt a lot stronger after that. And from that story, but you have to experience some of those things to learn about ourselves, learn about why we're allowing certain behaviors or certain things in our lives, everywhere, personal lives and professional lives. And then we have to learn, what are we going to do about them? So in a way, it was very painful to go through. But I'm so glad that it happened, because it set me into a much higher trajectory of strength than if I had just kept dealing with like an individual student who kind of was hard to work with. Or, oh, this was a tougher class, or this was, that group didn't really, okay. No, it was like, it really needed to be in my face.
Yeah. And that's good that you can look at it and say it was a good thing because of what you learned. And yeah, I felt that way about this group of students too at my school. They kind of band together. And that is why I switched to a younger grade, where they more do care about like the teacher and impressing you rather than their friends. There was another story in there, and I can't remember if this was before or after the snacky girls in the book, where the one individual girl got mad at you, and then she just gave you the silent treatment, shut you off. And she was kind of what you would call like a queen bee in the high school. So she had a lot of social power, and she she got other people on board with her as well. Talk about that too.
Yeah, and that happens. And doing this work and being, despite the fear of it, being willing to publish this and put it out there. And then I've had a lot of teachers email me. I've had a lot of teachers message me on social media, and they're like, I was reading your book and I got to this part, and like the same thing happened to me. And it was so stressful. And I'm like, I know it's so stressful. So I think one, being able to bring attention to, if that happens to you and you have a student who kind of like turns on you or ends up kind of pulling other people into their energy, excuse me, or you feel like, oh, like this group just seems to sort of be like stonewalling me or something. I can't
Mhm.
quite get through. You're not alone in that. And all of this behavior is communication. So, what is it communicating? But also, how can we keep ourselves emotionally strong so we go home in one emotional strong piece? But in this incident, we had a student, and yeah, she got really upset with me, really angry with me. And then she just refused to like look at me, say hello to me, refused to engage in the class. She had a lot of social power. So then you had friends who were like, well, I can't really be excited to be in here anymore because she's not too excited to be in here anymore. And then it just sort of like whirlpooled like a whole bunch of students into this, like, just you'd walk into the classroom and say hi and you would just get like nothing back. And you were like, geez,
Mhm.
last week we were we were kumbaya in here. We were having a good time. And I had to really learn, like, I cannot continue to be a person who has to receive that outside validation. I can't hand over my goodness of self and my self-worth and my worthiness as an individual and as a teacher to the fluctuating emotions of teenagers.
Mhm.
And if that student chooses to be upset with me because of a grade that I gave and they're not willing to address it, I try to talk. I try to say, can we work through this? Let's share about why we're feeling this, or let's learn and teach through this. And there's a complete refusal there. That is out of your control. And there it's not that there's nothing you can do, but at that point, I think we then turn to ourselves and we
Mhm.
work on ourselves through it. And then hopefully as we continue to work and strengthen ourselves, that situation becomes a little less tangled, a little less pervasive, and then things have a way of working themselves out. And then of course we can always listen to other supports, parent support, if we can get that, guidance counselor support, administrator support. Sometimes I'll just send an email and say, I just want you aware that this situation is going on. I am hoping it'll recover. I don't really need anything from you right now, but I want you to be aware that it's happening in case in a week or 2 weeks I do need help from you and support from you. You're not just being called into it 2 weeks into this situation now building.
Right. And then you also talked about how this particular student, even after that year was over, she would see you in the hallway, she would whisper to her friends, and they would laugh. So they were treating you back like you're back in high school again. And I
Mhm.
had that situation too when I was in middle school. I had this three group of girls who would give me dirty looks in the hallway, or they would both look at me and then snicker with each other. And it's unfortunate you're brought right back to middle and high school. And again, and that feeling, it's still there, even though you're a grown adult and they're kids,
Yeah.
you can't help it.
Mhm.
Um, well, let's talk about work life balance because you had to really learn this as time went on. So, you talked in the book about how you would spend hours like making the best, most engaging lessons, and because you wanted to have the best classroom. And then other teachers would just be like, hey, can I have it? And then just take it. So, let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think this is so variable to the districts you're in, the grade levels you're in. Sometimes just a lot of sharing of things. My experience, it wasn't with all of my colleagues, but my experience with a couple select situations was just a lot of giving, but not a whole lot of receiving. So all of this goes hand in hand, where you can feel taken advantage of. You can feel like you are allowing situations in your classroom where you're feeling dismissed or you're feeling like you're kind of walked on, and like why are we allowing it? What is in us that's kind of allowing this to occur? So I was beginning to learn a lot about myself in terms of, I'm a people pleaser. I want people happy with me. I love the approval of others. I want to set myself up to have a good reputation. I don't want a lot of conflict. And then sometimes it's just easier to be like, okay, here you go, as opposed, and then, but of course, you're going to have to keep doing that, as opposed to dealing with the root of the problem or having that tougher conversation, but then setting yourself up with empowerment later. So, maybe having that conversation of, I can share with you the idea that I have, but I am not going to share with you all the full materials because I spent a lot of time on that. And hey, you may not think that's a big deal, but it's really important to me that I preserve that. Or what if you tried it out and then we could share what we both did? And perhaps there's something you're bringing to it that I haven't even seen. And I'm like, oh, that's a really cool way of looking at that. And then I can share what I've done. And there might be something that you could use from what I've done. And there's more of a collegiality, there's more of a sharing that occurs at that point, as opposed to, okay, here you go, you can just have it, knowing all the hours or the sacrifice of hours you spent on that work. And then I think that's kind of in everything. Like, the teacher world is such a giving world. So while we're salaried employees and we have a lot of benefits, we also could be the advisor of 5 clubs. We could,
Mm-hmm.
and they
Yeah.
could all be unpaid. We could be on committees. We could do extracurriculum work. We could be the facilitator of a professional development group. And all of that typically is unpaid work. And I don't want to ever say that we should never do that, but I also think it should be what motivates us and moves us. Recently, I had the opportunity to run my school's book club. Well, I love books. So I have a few students who are, just integral to the group. And then we have other students who kind of come and go. But it's a nice group of students who were like, oh, we get to like meet every week during study hall. We get to read cool books. Sometimes we'll have hot chocolate. I really enjoy it. It's not paid. It's a small group, but I like it. So yeah, it's easy for me to want to give my time to that. If it's something where I'm looking at it and I'm like, I'm giving this to you, and it makes me just feel like I'm just being used, I
Yeah.
really think that's where we have to evaluate why then are we allowing ourselves to give it? And what are some other solutions so we don't feel like we're constantly in that space?
Right. And just I have a question. So did your admin or did they expect you to be coming up with these lessons? And then why didn't the county or state provide curriculum, or is it just something you wanted to do?
Yeah, so in my school where I teach, we have common assessments and we also have a curriculum design map. But in a lot of ways, we have some freedom to go about things the way we want to. So we have certain content we're covering, like I said, assessments that we have to give that are common, and then that'll be data collection of how the students are performing. I'm in the state of Pennsylvania, so we also have Keystone exams. That's going to be another standardized data benchmark that we receive of how our individual students are achieving. So we have all of that, but in a lot of ways, it's like, oh, I have this project idea and I really want to do it. I think it'd be kind of cool. I'm going to develop it. And then where I teach, that's supported, and then we're able to do it. So if I wanted my students to try podcasts, for example, and it's like, hey, let's do this little mini project and we'll talk about this book that we just read, or we'll come up with some different themes or character motivations, author's purpose, and we'll break into some small groups and have cool conversation, and then we'll organize it in a podcast. And now you're moving all that conversation to like a publication place, like a level 5. I could develop all this work for that, examples, directions, a rubric, etc. That would be something that I would create on my own, and then perhaps someone would want to use that, or perhaps I would say, let's share in the using as opposed to me just handing it.
Right. Well, have you thought about selling on Teachers Pay Teachers if you've already spent all this time making the content?
Yeah, absolutely. I do have an account on there, and I
Mhm.
want to say it's quite emerging.
Okay.
But I do hope to build that, because that has been a really neat thing to see in others, and then to be like, I do think that some of this could be very meaningful and useful for other teachers too.
Right. Well, tell us what your Teachers Pay Teachers name is so other people can look at it.
Yeah, it's just my name, Diane
Oh,
Manser.
okay.
So it's just me there. Yeah, that's very emerging. But one thing I do have on there, which I'm very proud of, is my writing packet. So
Mm.
I teach ninth grade, so I like to build the students with their complex sentences, their sentence structure. It's very important to me. Their correct researching and building sentences around quotes. So just kind of doing that quote sandwich, some of us will call it that. And I have a lot of mini lessons that build those skills. So by the time you get to your, let's say we're writing a paragraph or writing a paper, then you've already done so much like itemized skill work and you've already done so much practice. And now when it's time to apply it in a way that's going to be a certain assessment, the students already have a lot of review of that. So I'm really proud of that writing packet that's on there if anyone wants to check that out.
No, that's great. Okay, so you talk about in your book, you were so into the teaching and the profession that even when you had a little baby that was sick, you still went to work. Your husband was home with the baby before anybody. He's like, what? You didn't send him or her to daycare sick or anything, but you were just, that's how invested in teaching you were. Talk about that. And would you recommend that, if someone does have a new baby right now, what should they do?
Yeah, thank you. That was something I had to learn as well. All these lessons that came to me in that first like 10 years of teaching. And I do agree with you that I was so invested in teaching that I wanted to teach, but to be more honest and to be more upfront with you and the audience too, it was really a fear of, well, what's going to happen if I'm not there?
Mhm.
Like I'm I'm the only one who really can introduce this or run this, or I'm really the only one who can make this go really well. So it was a fear of like, what's going to happen if I'm not the one who's controlling it, providing it, giving it. And then also, well, what if I'm home or I have to be home for 2 days and then I go back into the classroom and all that work that I had put in to set everything up like is kind of unraveling or it's kind of hard to assimilate back in. Sometimes I would get intimidated just by the creating of lesson plans for a
Mhm.
substitute. Like that's a lot of work and time. And if you have
Mhm.
multiple classes that you're preparing for, you're like, oh my God, that was like an hour or 2 hours of work. It would have been easier for me just to go in and just
Right.
do the day. I would get intimidated by that. I would also feel, and I want to be very honest with you, I'd feel this fear of if I'm out of school, is that going to look bad? Or if I'm out of school too often, am I going to be seen as someone who doesn't care about her job or doesn't take this very seriously? Or am I going to be seen as someone who like is out a lot? And
Mhm.
how is that going to be received or viewed? So I had a lot of fear around perception. I had a lot of
Mm.
fear around judgment. I had a lot of fear of control. And that was really what was driving me to then go into school if I had a baby or a child who didn't feel good, or I would immediately look at my husband and he knows me so well. He would know that I have these fears and he
Mhm.
would then just swoop in and save the day. That's okay. I can do it. I can rearrange my day. It's not a problem. You go head into school. I'll be okay. I'll call the doctor. We'll take care of her. We're good. And I'd be like, okay, thank you. So he would be like both helping me and also enabling all of it. Um, so it got to the point where we had to look at each other and say, no, we're in a family partner system here. And I do have a husband and I do have someone I can rely on. And we've decided we're every other day. So every other instance, I should say. So if I don't know, it's September 5th and there's an instance with one of the children and we have to stay home, I'm up first. He's up second. I'm up third. I have all the odd ones. He has all the even ones. I mean, overall, that system works, but it keeps
Mhm.
me in check where I don't then over rely on him because I could and I would, and he would also allow it. We would just do it. I think it's so important as we become new mothers and, well, I'll say mothers, I'm a mother, but new parents, dads and moms. And we are also in our teacher world that we recognize we are now where and when is so important in our lives. So we are now in the where of multiple places. We are in our classroom life, we're in our home life of managing a home, being a partner, and now we're also in a parent life. We have three big wheres. Where are
Mhm.
we? Classroom, home, parent. And I think it's important to see it and then to be able to balance as best we can and to ask ourselves, like, that school day, yeah, maybe it's not going to be the best, but I'll be able to go in there and recover it the next day. I'll pull those expectations back, or I'll revisit that lesson and it'll be okay. And I was able to also be where I needed to be for the emergency space.
Right. And you know what? I think as someone coming from outside teaching too, but that's something that all working mothers of little ones have to grapple with, because, you do tend to take more time off if you have kids, and you're always like, oh, I have to take another day off, and how's that going to look? And I actually think that in teaching, from my experience, they're more understanding, because most people got into the profession because they love kids, and most of them have their own kids. Like, I already had to call out one day this week my school because my son, we thought he might have broken his foot, but he didn't. So that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's tough, but that's tough for all working parents, I think, in all professions.
Yeah, I think it's also just looking at, like, what are the things that keep coming up for you. So for me, that was some of the things that kept on coming up for me. What is coming up for you or for our listeners? Like, if there's something that continues showing stress in your life, I think we have to be curious about that and then examine it. Like, why is this causing me stress? Why do I get so unnerved when I'm in this situation or around this person? And how can I work to move through that in a solution way? So yeah, it may not be some people. I have lots of colleagues who are like, I don't think twice when I happen to call out. I have the
Mhm.
days I need to take care of home. That is that. And I'm like, wow, I'm like, that's amazing, because I still think twice about it despite all the learning.
Right.
I just make a better decision now, but I still go,
Mhm.
oh man, is there a way I cannot? Oh, no, that's silly. Let me take care of it. So not everyone has those same things that pop up, but we all have something that pops
Mhm.
up as stress in our day.
Definitely. Yes. So I think I already know the answer, but do you plan to keep doing this until you retire?
Oh, as of right now, yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And it's not necessarily any less hard,
Mhm.
I still, just even last spring, I was both mad and laughing with a friend who read my book in draft form. I was working towards the publication in May. I was so excited about the book going out to publication, also nervous, and I was like so frustrated and upended by a class that I was teaching. And I was like, here I am about to publish this book about the empowerment of teaching and how to move yourself to empowerment. And I'm like nervous and stressed in this class. Yeah, it's the metaphor of being a bodybuilder or being
Mhm.
someone who's health conscious or who, exercises. It's like you don't just do it once a month. It's ongoing. You don't
Mhm.
just do it when it's hard. You do it when you feel good too. Like, you look at the things that you handled in your day and you're like, you know what? I had that conversation and I handled it. And 10 years ago, I may not have asserted myself the same way. And look at how much I've grown. So even when things are going well, I still think it's important for us to reflect and be like, I'm the one who's allowing it to go well. I'm the one who's stepping into that. And I want to encourage myself in that way. So that way, when it's hard, we just have so much more that we've also acknowledged in ourselves.
Right. And I totally get that reference, because actually I'm like trying to get in shape. It's like
Mhm.
I started like a year ago. You literally start not being able to do anything, and then more and more. But even you can get to like a mid-range. You see the people online who have the big muscles. Like, it takes even another year to get to that point. So same thing. It takes time to do all of these things.
Mhm.
So let's talk about the future of teaching. What if somebody is going to college right now, wants to go into teaching? Would you encourage people to get into teaching, or would you
Oh.
discourage it?
Oh, I would absolutely encourage it without a doubt. I just don't think, Kelly, I don't think there is a profession that you're able to give so much of yourself and then to be able to build on that than teaching. We think about some of our other professions that are people professions where you're giving and you're giving care, But in some cases, it could be very individualized. There could be a lot of turnover. You think about like nurses, for example, how much of themselves they give. But the idea is that we heal that patient and that patient goes home. And then we get the
Mhm.
next patient. There's a lot of turnover there. And in other professions where you're giving so much, it could be very individualized, like therapists where, they could work one-on-one or in small groups. Teaching, we get just, at this point, entering my 19th year, I have taught thousands of individuals. I have cared for thousands of people who've come through my space, who've seen me as their English teacher, and that matters. And I
Mhm.
just don't know if there's a profession where we can give so much of our best self to others and be able to build on it and be able to improve it. We're so lucky every school year ends and we say, I did this well, I'm going to maintain it. I got to improve this. I get a fresh start next year. And those students don't know that I've evaluated and I'm improving this piece of my teaching. They just know this is how it is.
Mhm.
We're so lucky in that way. So, oh, absolutely. I would encourage everyone, anyone to be a teacher, but also to recognize it can be emotionally challenging. And when it is, you're not alone in that. And when it is, we have to look at ourselves as to why and then work through that to solution.
Right, right. Yes, that sounds really good. So unfortunately, because I have a son who is about to go to college, so I'm in, a Facebook group on talking about how do you pay for college and getting your
Mm.
kids into college. And there are parents that were like, if you get a teaching degree, I am not paying for it, or like discouraging their kids from going into teaching. And sometimes even people who are teachers who would like, I would never recommend it. So unfortunately, there's that rhetoric going on right now. But we
Yeah.
need teachers. Your
Mhm.
your own kids are going to be educated by a teacher. So I think we should
Mhm.
stop discouraging it. Which brings me to the overall big picture, the future of teaching. Like so many teachers are getting out of it. What do you think the future of teaching looks like?
I think that right now we are, I want to liken it to the phones that we talked about
Mhm,
earlier. And I think that we are in a spot where a lot of attention is being brought into those pain points of teaching. And I really do think it's going to be continue to be talked about, continue to be exposed to where there's going to be a shift into it being improved, just like we have with the phones. It's like, okay, we've been voicing it, we've been saying it, they're a problem, it's been causing distraction, we have to fix it, we have to work on it. And now it's like, okay, we're coming in, we're giving solutions. I think that we're in that middle part right now where
mhm,
teachers are one very encouraged that if I share my voice, I have other people who are acknowledging that. And then I think we have a lot more people who are listening because
mhm,
simply put, the numbers are forcing them to listen. Because,
mhm,
I don't know the numbers in terms of if you were a professor in a college and you could say, oh, 10 years ago, I had my intro to education course and it housed 30 students. And now 10 years later, I have my intro to education course and it houses 12 students. I don't know those numbers, but I do want to say that just in the sheer, rates of teachers resigning or not entering the profession, we do have those numbers. And I think the numbers alone speak to there's an issue. Plus, we have all these people voicing their own stories. I wouldn't say to be scared by that. I would say to be encouraged of how brave you are, that you are willing to go into a profession that is a bit uncertain, that you are still wanting to make a difference because you know you have something to give. And you're going to figure it out, as a lot of us have. And it's just a matter of recognizing that it's both and that it's both going to be like, this is so cool. I get to do this. Or I love this group. I love this class. This is so much fun. And like, wow, I get to do this every day. And it's also like, woo, that last class is like, oh my gosh, well, that's a really tough one. It's both and how do we keep ourselves in the full reality of teaching? So yeah, I think there's going to be some shifts that occur personally in the future.
right, right. And it's unfortunate because if somebody is parents is there, if you become a nurse, I'll pay for your college. If you become a teacher, I won't. Then they are going to more likely be to choose that other profession because then they don't want to have college debt. So, and
Mhm.
also a lot of people a lot of parents online are saying, well, if you don't like it, just quit. And then people were like, okay, I will. And now people are leaving in droves, and people are finally seeing the impact. Oh, if these teachers quit, that means we only have someone with a high school diploma as a substitute teacher, or a substitute teacher teaching biology who knows nothing about biology or knows nothing about Spanish. So this will impact your kids. And I know, and it can vary from state to state and county to county, but one of the biggest complaints is the pay. Well, a lot of places are starting to pay more now, a lot aren't, and they're the ones losing the most teachers and having the biggest teacher shortages. So I think you're right. I think it's like it's starting to shift, and so hopefully we get to the breakthrough soon before this group of kids growing up is the one who's going to suffer from it.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And maybe it'll be a situation where some of our high school graduates who are like, I think I might want to be a teacher. And then if they're not supported, or they're very concerned, like, when I don't have anyone helping me to pay for college because my parent doesn't believe in this idea, it might be like happened with you. It might be a second career. They
Yeah.
might be that 28 to 32-year-old who's like, I am a blank, and I'm doing fine being a blank, and it's paying the bills, and I like it all right. But now I'm at that 30-year-old kind of itch, where I'm like, what more is out there? What more can I give? I always kind of wanted to be a teacher, and maybe they'll be the ones who go back and get that degree, and then head into the classroom. Because they don't have that, like, oh, I'm 18, I need help paying for college. They're a little bit more established then. So that could even be something that we see occur too. We might see more second career people coming into the profession in 10 years because they wanted to initially and they got a little bit nervous or scared off.
Right.
That could be
And actually, I think that's actually happening now. And for those out there, some undergrad too, but a lot of second career teachers, the school system needs teachers so bad, they're helping to pay for it. So I'm in like a cohort where they're paying for half of my college, and like everybody in this cohort that I'm in, we're all like second career teachers. So that's an option as well. If you want to become a teacher, yes, and your parent says no, first see if there's a county or state willing to pay for your undergrad. And if there isn't, get a degree in something else, or get a degree in the subject you want to teach. If you want to teach math or science or English, get a degree in that. And then have the schools, a lot of school systems are willing to help you get the teaching certificate. So
that's wonderful. I'm so happy to hear that you had that. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yes, so that's good. So we talked a little about this at the beginning, but let's talk about it again. Where can people find you on social media?
Oh, thank you so much. I have a private Facebook group, and that is called Teaching is Emotional. So my book title is I Didn't Sign Up for This, and that is what a lot of us say when we're feeling these pains of teaching. And then my subtitle is One Classroom Teacher's Journey Through Emotional Fatigue to Personal Empowerment. That's what happened with me, where I was just trying to move myself to empowerment. So my theme, though, is that we're in an emotional profession. We may see it just as content, but actually our profession is much more emotional than what it is viewed as. I'm hoping to expand that conversation. So I am teaching is emotional on most things. I had that private Facebook group. It's such a nurturing, welcoming group. Please consider joining in. You will love it just as much as I have. I'm also on TikTok, Teaching is Emotional, and I am on Instagram, Teaching is Emotional. And I have a website called teachingIsEmotional.com. There you can get a free sample of the book. If that is interesting to you, you can see if it's something that you will also find to be motivating, inspiring, validating, moving you to hope and resiliency. And you can also find that book on Amazon. You could type in, I didn't sign up for this teacher book. You could type in Diane Manser and it'll pop right up for you. And you could also read reviews of the book on the website or on Amazon to also get other people's take on what they're reading. And some of those reviews are people who read it for me in draft form. A lot of the reviews are people who have just read it, and I don't even know who they are, some of them, and they've just popped a review on there. That's the coolest part, where you're like, I don't even know who this person is, and they put a review on. This is great, and you can see the reach of how this is helping teachers.
Well, I give it a 5 stars. I'll have to go on an
Thank
official
you.
site. But yes, it was definitely very interesting and relatable. And I think teachers will get a lot out of it. Well, thank you for coming on today and talking about your book.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I appreciate the opportunity. I absolutely love talking with you because everything that we've shared today, you have completely gotten. And
Yeah.
oh, that's what I'm hoping for. We can share more of our stories and we can share more of our ways to empowerment, how we do that individually. And then, oh my God, you just imagine the growing that we can do.
Yes.
So thank you for being you and for reading my book. Thank
Oh.
you for this opportunity and just the great conversation. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. All right. Thanks to all of you who will watch later, or if you came here live but just didn't say anything. Thank you. All right. Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone. Bye. Thank you.